Bill is on the desk.
Chairman Howell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform Senate Bill 2747.
Chairman Howell moves substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2747, properly second, without objection. So ordered. Chairman Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 2747 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Howell moves passage of Senate Bill 2747 on third and final consideration, properly second. Mr. Clerk, call the first amendment.
House Judiciary Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Kershaw, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Judiciary Committee Amendment number 1 changed the effective date from July 1, 2020 to October the 1st, 2020. Move to adopt.
Chairman Kershaw moves adoption of House Amendment number 1, properly second. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting House Amendment number 1 say aye, aye. All those opposed say no. You adopt. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Howell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill requires juvenile court petitions and orders to be open to public inspection if the delinquent act would constitute an act of terrorism or an attempt to commit terrorism if committed by an adult. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairman Howell renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Chairman Stewart, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor Gill.
Chairman Howell.
Sure.
Can you just be a little more clear about how this changes the law as it exists today?
Chairman Howell.
I can read the bill to you. As amended, adds a new following subdivision: does not have an adjudication of delinquency for a delinquent act if it is committed by an adult would constitute an act of terrorism as defined in code in an attempt or commit an act of terrorism. It says simply that juvenile courts shall not expunge a juvenile record following successful completion of an informal adjustment under the code, pretrial diversion under the code, or judicial diversion under the code if the child was accused of a delinquent act, that if that act was committed by an adult, and it would constitute an act of terrorism. That's from the bill.
Chairman Stewart.
And obviously nobody condones terrorism. I'm curious, could you be a little more expansive about the definition of terrorism as you describe it? Because it sounds like there's a pretty significant change of the law with respect to juveniles so involved.
Chairman Howell.
Well, it's outlined in the bill, Section B. Conduct constituting the delinquent act, if committed by an adult, would constitute first-degree murder, second-degree murder, rape, aggravated sexual battery, rape of a child, aggravated rape of a child, aggravated robbery, especially aggravated robbery, kidnapping, aggravated kidnapping, or especially aggravated kidnapping, or the conduct constituting the delinquent act, if committed by an adult, would constitute an act of terrorism as defined in code.
Chairman Stewart.
My only problem following, I don't mean to put you in the trick box. I genuinely, this didn't come through my committee. It sounds like the act of terrorism, you had all those serial items, and then there's the act of terrorism. Do you know what the definition of the code is? Again, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm genuinely interested, like, what is the act of terrorism defined as, so we know what is going to shift here when we change the law?
Chairman Howell.
I would have to refer to legal for that, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman Stewart.
Would you be able to roll this just 2 spaces so we could put that? Because then I'm not trying to slow down your bill. I think it's important because it's a pretty momentous situation when you change the law.
Chairman Kershaw, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to my good friend from Davidson County, I think you heard the description that the mayor gave of these heinous acts. I know we both agree that we certainly wouldn't want a juvenile having these things expunged. I want to remind you that under current law, present law, a person who's tried and adjudicated delinquent under rule by a juvenile court may subsequently file a motion for expunction of all court files in the juvenile records. What this bill does is simply says that for these particularly heinous acts, which again he listed earlier, that is no longer going to be the case. That those records will not be destroyed.
Chairman Stewart.
And I understand that, but I think the problem is there's a series of acts, but I don't think that's the definition of terrorism. Maybe I'm misunderstanding. I think rather there's an addition of a term terrorism that has its own meaning. We're talking about something that has a very significant impact on somebody's life. I'm just saying, can we move the bill 2 spaces so we can all look and see what it is we're passing here with respect to that definition? I'm looking, I can't find it, is why I think we ought to clarify.
Chairman Howe.
Mr. Speaker, I think the bill is very clear, and my chairman of Judiciary explained the situation very eloquently. I would prefer to move forward with the bill.
Chairman Stewart.
Well, I got to tell you, I think it's something we should have clarified before we do this. I think a lot of people would just like to know what they're voting on before they vote. That's my concern, and I think this is a momentous matter. You know, I've asked to roll the bill a few spaces. Sponsor doesn't want to do that, so I'll be voting against the bill simply because I don't know what it says.
Chairman Kershaw. Chairman Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, my light wasn't on. I wasn't sure the microphone was. Again, conduct constituting the delinquent act, if committed by an adult, would constitute first-degree murder, second-degree murder, rape, aggravated sexual battery, rape of a child, aggravated rape of a child, aggravated robbery, especially aggravated robbery, kidnapping, aggravated kidnapping, or especially aggravated kidnapping. I would hope that all of us could join together in this body and vote in support and say that we are absolutely and ardently against those things.
Representative Weaver, you're recognized. We'll come back. And Weaver passes. Leader Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to be clear, and I'll put this as sponsor of the legislation order, Chairman Curcio. From my understanding, what we're saying in this bill is that if a child, 14 to 18, commits one of those heinous offenses, and yes, I know it's labeled as an act of terrorism, but it's one of those offenses, then the records are then public. I mean, many of these offenses may be transferred to adult court, would be public anyways. But if a 16-year-old child, say, commits aggravated rape or second-degree murder, and at 19 they walk into your place of employment and want to get a job, I'd want to know that that had occurred. I think all this is more of just kind of a transparency bill to make sure that that part of the record is not hidden from public view like we would normally do with juvenile records. So, Mr. Sponsor, is that what your intent with the bill is?
Chairman Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I think the bill itself is very clear. The only thing that changes is the fact that previously these records could be sealed and could be expunged. And this bill simply says that would no longer be the case for these particular acts, which are heinous acts, and moving forward, they would not be expunged, it would be made public.
Anything else, Leader Lambert? No, sir. All right. Chairman Stewart, you're recognized.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think I've been asking kind of a simple question. I'm looking at 3913-803, and it has an act of terrorism definition, which is quite broad. All I'm trying to figure out is that wrapped into this bill? Because it contains a lot of information that's not part of this laundry list. Again, I've looked at this. I'm just trying to figure out what the implications of this are, because what we don't want is to completely change our juvenile code this morning, a very momentous change that encompasses all sorts of vague crimes that are not among the listed crimes that we're talking about.
Chairman Howe.
Thank you, Speaker. In response, I believe the bill is very clear. It is an act of terrorism or one of the other. All of them constitute a heinous act. Those acts should not be kept from the public. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Leader Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, to our friend from Davidson County, any change in the law is obviously momentous. I know that you always choose your words very carefully, but let's be clear that this is a tweak in the language. It will reveal the records publicly of, yes, an act of terrorism or murder, second-degree murder, rape, aggravated rape. It says that that's not shielded from public view. I mean, that's what we're talking about. So, I mean, I would argue that a momentous change, an overall change of the juvenile statutes, as you are trying to make this out, sounds like, would be if we changed all of those crimes where they could be transferred to adult court, or we took all those crimes off the books and said that anyone under 18 could not be charged them. This literally just says, if you committed these acts from 14 to 18, then it is available to the public to know. And again, in most of these circumstances, those are the crimes that are going to be transferred to adult court anyways. I can't really imagine a scenario when a first-degree murder charge, say 16 or 17, wouldn't be transferred to adult court and it would already be public. So we're probably only talking about a very few offenses, but some pretty severe behavior. And yes, an act of terrorism, while the definition of that is a little broader than you might be comfortable with, that'd be a different bill on trying to limit it down as far as, what the definition of that is.
Representative Mitchell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think my learned colleague from Davidson County was trying to be indirect. I'm going to be just as direct as I can. I'm reading this definition on terrorism, and it lists an offense under the laws of such jurisdiction that is intended directly or indirectly to A, intimidate or coerce a civilian population. So, Mr. Sponsor, my question to you is your legislative intent to pass this that it would refer to, let's say, 200 people out here outside of our doors chanting, "Take down a statue," and that somehow intimidating or coercing you or a civilian population? Are you referring to people marching in the streets, 10 to 20,000 probably this weekend, marching for civil rights, that you would consider that intimidation or coercion of a civilian population? So is that your legislative intent or is it not?
Chairman Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think this bill is very clear. It has to do with juveniles between 14 and 18. The definition has been read, and it's terrorism or the other incidents listed in the bill. So the bill is pretty narrow, it's pretty clear, and all I can do is tell you what's in the bill.
Representative Mitchell.
Obviously, that was a non-answer, ladies and gentlemen. We had last week 10,000 juveniles organized and marched on the streets of Nashville very peacefully. And I'm just curious, I think my question was quite clear. It's either a yes or no answer. Is it your intent, legislative intent, that large protests for civil rights could be defined as intimidation or coercion of a civilian population? Because unfortunately, we got a lot of people in this state that, mistakenly think it is.
Chairman Curcio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I think we may just hadn't had enough to fight about this morning. This bill, and again, if I did more harm than good earlier, I apologize. This bill simply says that you're between the ages of 14 and 18. You've got to have a couple of factors. There's an order there. It says the conduct constituting the delinquent act, if committed by an adult, would constitute first-degree murder, second-degree murder, in that list that I read earlier, or the conduct constituting the delinquent act, if committed by an adult, would constitute an act of terrorism as assigned by 3913-803, or attempt to commit an act of terrorism. It simply says those records can't be destroyed. It doesn't trample on anybody's First Amendment rights. We're not talking about peaceful protesters. This is a very, very minor tweak in the law. It's just saying that those records cannot be expunged any longer if it's one of these heinous acts. And a heinous act would include any of this list of an act of terrorism found in 3913-803. So again, I know we all had our Wheaties this morning and we might just be looking for something to fuss about. But this is a very good bill. The Judiciary Committee, which you sit on, my good friend from Bellevue, is a very active and engaged member of that committee. I didn't hear any of these questions or objections in the subcommittee or in the full committee when you had an opportunity to talk about them. And so I support the sponsor of this legislation. I support the intent of this legislation. And again, if I wasn't clear or did more harm good the first time I talked, I apologize. But I think this is very, very clear.
Representative Mitchell?
Yeah, and I'm glad the chairman is so amped to let people speak his committee, because the other day,
Chairman Mitchell, you're out of order, sir. I'm warning you right now. We're not going on this on House floor today. If you go down that road, you will be cut off. We're stopping right there. Representative Mitchell.
I'm going to ask for the third time. Mr. Sponsor, is it your legislative intent to consider coercion or intimidation of a civilian population, protesters protesting for civil rights on the streets of our state?
Chairman Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my intent to do exactly what the bill says. And that is require juvenile court petitions and orders to be open to public inspection, as outlined in the bill for certain crimes.
Representative Miller, did I see your hand earlier?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor, you.
Chairman Howe.
Yes.
Mr. Sponsor, I'm going to go directly to Representative Mitchell was just asked. Based on what I'm reading in the legislation, intimidate or coerce a civilian population. Just for clarity and understanding, would a juvenile, if they committed this violation, would they be considered terrorists?
Chairman Howe.
That would be up to a court to decide, I assume. What this bill does, I think we're way off track. What this bill does is simply says if they are convicted. If they're not convicted, the records would remain sealed. If they are convicted, it would require juvenile court petitions and orders to be open to public inspection if they're convicted of committing one of those crimes outlined in the bill. I don't know how much more clear I can make that.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A juvenile between the ages of 14 and 18, if they commit any of these violations, could be defined as terrorism.
Chairman Howe.
The operative word there, Representative, is convicted. Not committed, but convicted.
Representative Miller.
Again, they could be brought up on charges.
Chairman Howe.
Again, the same answer, they have to be convicted.
Representative Miller.
Last question. You referred to an adult as if one of these crimes were committed, murder, rape, as a juvenile, but the definition could be applied to them being an adult. In other words, if an adult commits the crime of rape and murder, are they currently considered, or is that currently considered as a terrorist act in the current law?
Chairman Howe.
Again, the definitions outlined in the bill say an act of terrorism or one of those other crimes.
Representative Miller.
With all due respect, it's really not answering my direct. It's a simple question of law. Not being a lawyer, I'm just asking, what does the current law say about an adult?
Chairman Howe.
Representative Miller, the list that you referred to does not redefine terrorism. It's either that list or terrorism. We're not redefining terrorism. We're saying if a juvenile, 14 to 18, commits one of those crimes that an adult would conceivably commit, that juvenile's records, if convicted, would not be kept sealed. That's really all the bill does.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Sponsor. Thank you, Speaker.
Representative Powell, are you still wanting to be recognized? Nope, I waved away. Representative Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've gotten a little bit of confusion going on in my head today. It seems like people's positions on certain issues can sometimes be confusing, and I'm trying to figure out myself where I come down on this, and I'm looking for a little insight from you because it seems to me like this would be a good bill, so much so that if you don't support this bill, would you say that people are supporting terrorism?
Out of order. Chairman Howe, you're recognized.
I really don't have an opinion on that.
Leader Gant, you're recognized.
Previous question, Mr. Speaker.
Previous question's been called. Is there an objection? There's an objection. We're on the board. We're voting on previous question. All those in favor vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Take the vote, Mr. Clerk.
Aye, 68-21.
Previous question prevails. We are voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2747 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member cast a vote? Does any member wish to change their vote? Take the vote, Mr. Clerk.
Aye, 69-14-8, 7 present, not voted.
Senate Bill 2747 having received constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2726,